My name's Sierra Laurel, and I'm on the board with Deborah here at Bay Area Humanists, and we're really appreciative of the opportunity to talk to you today about humanism and our paths to humanism, and also a little bit about our organization, because both of us are on the board of the Bay Area Humanists, which is the local chapter of the American Humanists Association. So we'll start off with a brief review of the values that most people who self-identify as humanists hold. We'll include a very brief historical review of the development of humanism, and you'll see that while the modern humanist movement is really a little less than 100 years old, humanist thinking goes back well into ancient times. And then we'll talk about our individual paths to humanism just a bit. And then I'll kick it over to Deborah, who will talk specifically about Bay Area Humanists and some of the events that we do and the activities that we've held or sponsored, and just some of the fun that we have together. So the first thing we want to do is get a sense of who's heard about this. So if we go to the next slide, we'll kick off with a poll just to get some idea of how many of you have heard about humanism and have an understanding of what that word means before we get into things. So Rachel's gonna put together a poll, really simple poll. And there we go. Okay, so not bad. And sort of, I like that. I wasn't sure how many of us would be like, I'm not really sure. So good, we've got a good chunk of you who haven't heard of it. So we hope to give you a nice, simple understanding of what it is, and hopefully pique your interest. So next slide. Let's start with the definition of humanism, at least according to the American Humanist Association. So humanism, according to the American Humanist Association, is a progressive life stance that, without supernaturalism, affirms our ability and responsibility to lead meaningful, ethical lives capable of adding to the greater good of humanity. That part, without supernaturalism, means that the humanist philosophy does not depend on any type of supernatural revelation, but depends on nature and human thought, observation, and reason. The ability and responsibility to lead meaningful lives capable of adding to the greater good of humanity really affirms a humanist belief that we humans can solve our problems if we have the will to do so, and that we can live meaningful lives, and we must determine what is meaningful to us. But this meaning or purpose isn't given to us by a god or an ideology or any religion. Working for the greater good of humanity as a whole is one way that we can find meaning in our lives, and is one of the values then that humanists hold very dear. Next slide. We like to visualize humanism as being supported by two pillars, and those pillars are naturalism and human flourishing. These ideas can be envisioned like so, right? Naturalism and human flourishing on supporting frameworks for humanism as a whole. The definition of naturalism, right, is the philosophical conclusion that the only reality is nature, right? What we experience through our senses is gradually discovered by our intelligence using the tools of experience, reason, and science. And then on the other side is human flourishing, which is a concept that means to grow or to develop in a healthier, vigorous way, especially as the result of a particularly favorable environment. The second pillar is really addresses the best way to live one's life, for it to be meaningful, to live ethically, and to contribute to the greater good of humanity, right? We can say this is how one can live well, which is to flourish. So that is the second pillar. It emphasizes not only the responsibility of the individual, but also the necessity of a favorable environment, right? Whether that be our community, our country, the world, and also the natural environment, right? Humans are not living separately from nature. It is an interdependent system, and we recognize that. And so we know that it is not just that human flourishing isn't this selfish aim, right? For humans to flourish, everything really must flourish, right? The system must be healthy. So the flourishing of individuals is absolutely tied to the environment that we live in. And of course, naturalism, right, still means without supernaturalism. It implies that we see things through our own observation, evidence-based, right, scientific method. Next slide. Would like to do another poll just to see, with this little bit of information so far, how these values align with your existing values and whether or not you see some of these already, that you're living these already. So Rich is going to put a poll up. To what extent do these values resonate with your existing beliefs? All right. Very good. We often see this as the case. And so when one doesn't have a familiarity with humanism, there does seem to be this intrinsic correlation, right, or resonance that exists in a lot of us already, whether or not we know of this this formal kind of structure for these values and principles that we hold dear. So very cool. A little bit of history. We'll go to the next slide. As I mentioned earlier, modern humanism is a little less than 100 years old, but thinking that is humanistic, that is not dependent, again, on revelation from gods, and that strives to understand how the individual and societies can thrive, that way of thinking is ancient. So we can go all the way back to the ancient Greeks, the Romans, the Chinese, and the Indians to actually find philosophical thinking that matches these two pillars of humanism. In the West, this type of thinking has waxed and waned over the centuries, but eras associated with the ascendancy of this type of thinking include, I think, obviously the Renaissance, right, the Enlightenment, and the scientific age. We can, very clearly see the beginning of, say, modern humanism with the publication of the Humanist Manifesto One in 1933. That is the foundational document, and that manifesto has been revised twice since then, right? We iterate as we learn more, and to make it even more valuable and to incorporate learnings, right? We must iterate as we learn more. So a book that I just want to point out here that might be helpful if you want to learn more, this book here, What is Good? The Search for the Best Way to Live by A.C. Grayling. It shows the interplay between religious thinking and naturalist thinking and how they waxed and waned throughout the ages. So it's a really nice history of how humans have been trying to figure it out, right, since the beginning. So on the next slide is just some of the pillars of the latest Humanist Manifesto, the third version. So the most recent version was published in 2003. And to give you a feeling of the values expressed, right, in that manifesto, of showing you some of the bullet points from that document. So the first one is knowledge derived by observation, by experimentation, rational analysis, right? That humans find that science is the best method for determining this knowledge as well as for solving problems and developing beneficial technologies that, again, both serve us as well as anything around us, right? Other creatures in our environment. Finding meaning in life. Humans are social by nature, and we find meaning in relationships. So one of the core values and beliefs is that life's fulfillment emerges from individual participation in the service of humane ideals. Understanding, a coherent understanding of the universe. Humans are an integral part of nature, and we are the result of unguided evolutionary change. This is a principle or belief that we hold dear. Morality, also found in relationships, is derived from human need and interest, is tested by experience. We are committed to treating each other as having inherent worth and dignity. And we figure that out by engaging with each other, right? And those, like, does those feel good or bad, right? And those things come up intuitively for us. Minimizing inequalities of circumstance. Very important that we seek to minimize inequalities between us, whether by circumstance or ability. We support a just distribution of nature's resources and the fruits of our labor, so that as many as possible can enjoy a good life. The next is governance, a democratic governance. Humanists are very concerned for the well-being of all, right? And are committed to diversity and respect of those differing yet humane views. There's more than one right way to do a thing, right? We all share the same goals, though, human flourishing. And we work to uphold the equal enjoyment of human rights and civil liberties in an open, secular society that maintains its civic duty to participate in the democratic process. So it is political. And then lastly is our environment, our planetary duty, that humanists maintain it is a planetary duty to protect nature's integrity, its diversity and beauty, but in a secular and sustainable manner. Humanist Manifesto 3 is published on the American Humanist Association's website. So you can check out the full document there, as well as many other resources and information around humanism. And we've got those links on our final slide that we can point you to, as well as our website that has information. So that's generally humanism. Our next slide, I'll start first with my path to humanism, because we all have a path. And many of us started in, depending on how old we are, right, with parents being in, having a religious practice, perhaps generally is the case. So my parents were no exception. My mom had been brought up in a Christian household, but she was also very evidence-based. She maintained, that we should pay attention to science, and was the first in her family to go to college, and so was exposed to different ways of thinking. And when I was 4, we moved to Eugene, Oregon, and from California, and we went to church. My mom thought this will be a place where we can find community. She was recently divorced, and so had 2 little kids, and was looking for support. We then went to Sunday school, right, and went to different sermons. And I was, at the time, right, was trying to understand what I was experiencing, going through, learning. And I very clearly remember being in grade school, maybe 6 years old, lying in bed in our new house and trying to pray. Right, I had learned about this thing, this effort that I could do to try to change things, and my thought process there was, this feels a bit silly. That no one is there, or that and then I started actually to think, why would my prayers get answered and not somebody else's? Because my mom had always exposed us to the realities of others and the way that their unfortunate or fortune, right, and was teaching us how to be appreciative of what we had. So it became very confusing to me that there were some people who prayed really, really hard and didn't get their prayers answered at all, and seemingly other people, didn't do anything at all, and they seemed to be fine. So it just didn't jibe. We did end up stop going to church, as it wasn't the source, the community source that my mom thought it was. Again, anecdotal experience. Some people find wonderful communities at church. In high school, then I was in an international program that introduced philosophy, and the study of history and history of religion. And I was exposed to secular writers and different ways of interpreting the world. That drove me very strongly into philosophy major in college. I took as many courses as possible. I gravitated towards everything secular, and and anything that had kind of a humanist foundation, because I had always found myself wanting to live a life of reason, but still with intent and purpose, right? I didn't think that just because I came from an evolutionary path didn't mean that I didn't have purpose. And that with this life, it was our responsibility to leave every place better than we found it. That was a teaching that my mom's mom gave her and that she passed on to me. And that working to benefit society actually does benefit the individual. So the alignment between my personal values and humanism was pretty clear. I moved to San Francisco in 2014 for growth, opportunity, career, and I joined meetup.com, which was a happening thing. We're trying to, again, find community. And as Bay Area Humanists came up as this resource, as this group that might be of interest to me. So that's how I found this group. And I just checked my profile a little while ago, and I joined in April 30th of 2015. And had been attending events kind of sporadically since, while I was going to school and working and figuring things out, and became a dues paying member in December of 2019 and joined the board in January of 2020. So that is just a tiny history of mine. And thank you for listening. I want to hand it over to Deborah, who I know has her own personal story of how she found humanism and Bay Area Humanists.
Well, hi, everybody. My name's Deborah. I'm too, like Sarah, I'm on the board of the Bay Area Humanists. My parents were some version of liberal Protestant. My mother had been raised in rural Kentucky, where in some churches people spoke in tongues and handled snakes. And she acquired a well-honed horror of such goings on. My father was raised literally in backwoods Kentucky, where men drank and fought, and religion was for women. We moved a lot when I was young because my father, actually the first college graduate in his extended family, worked on aerospace contracts and we moved on whenever the contracts were over. But wherever we lived, my mom made some effort to associate us to a church and get us kids into Sunday school. I attended dutifully, though without enthusiasm. I was a dutiful kid. Religion wasn't a big deal in our house anyway. God was rarely mentioned, Jesus never. We only ever said grace at Thanksgiving and Christmas meals, and it was an uncomfortable sort of ritual. I was well behaved as a kid, doing what I was told, thinking only of immediate things. I had no deeper existential thoughts. I was a passive believer in God. I was in my teens during the 60s, but the turmoil of the times made little impression on me. I read novels from the library, did my schoolwork, bemoaned my zits, and noticed current events not at all. But as I entered my teens, those romance novels began to trigger edgy feelings associated to incipient sexuality. I would indulge in lurid thoughts, secret imaginings in my private mind, weaving long and arousing daydreams involving characters from the novels or even some of the cute boys I knew. I quite enjoyed my imaginings. Then I learned one day in confirmation class, which was preparatory to baptism, which liberal Protestants do when they're in their teens. I learned that God knows your thoughts, or God hears your thoughts. And I was thunderstruck and horrified to think that my thoughts were not private, that God was listening into my secret fantasies. It was like a violation. I got mad. God had no business in my head. I cast him out. Up until then, I had a passive, unexamined belief in God, but I never bothered to think very much on the topic. This was the first real instance of my introspection. And while I refused to believe that God could hear my thoughts, I didn't entirely dismiss the idea of God. I remained just kind of vaguely dubious, agnostic, can't say one way or the other. Maybe there's God, maybe there isn't. I didn't actually care very much. I had a relationship in my early 20s with what we called in those days a Jesus freak. I tried hard to let Jesus into my heart as my boyfriend kept urging. I went to church with him. I read the entire New Testament for the first time in its entirety, trying to make my heart open to Jesus and God, but I couldn't do it. Too much of what I read raised my hackles. I underlined passages in my Bible. I argued with it in the margins. So in the end, I remained agnostic and that boyfriend faded away. Decades passed. I got married, had kids, etc. And in 2006 or 2007, I read Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, and it was an eye-opening book. I mean, I can highly recommend this for logic and just plain common sense. From it, I acquired the courage to stop being wishy-washy on the subject of my atheism or agnosticism. In fact, I began to call it atheism. I realized that it wasn't just that I didn't believe in God, a position which sort of affirms the existence of a God, but I asserted that I believe there is no God, no matter how you describe God. I just didn't buy it. However, just not believing in God is not much of a worldview. I respected nature and science and truth. I had morals, though not particularly conventional ones, and ethics. I tried to be and considered myself a good person and a strenuous environmentalist. My husband was also an atheist, so God was not a topic of discussion in our house. After my husband died in 2016, I began looking for social groups to join, groups of people with my own interest in intellectual pursuits. I found Meetup. And through Meetup, I found the lectures at the UU Church in San Francisco and the forums of the Bay Area Humanists. I found them very interesting and refreshing. It was deeply satisfying to find that a named philosophy existed that affirmed and put structure to my rather amorphous belief set. And so I came to identify myself as a humanist. Since then, I've put some work into honing a succinct nutshell description of what humanism is, since everybody asks when I say that I'm a humanism. And so thought I would leave this with you because I worked hard on this and I think it is pretty comprehensive. And it goes like this. Humanism is a non-theistic philosophy that affirms that we humans, without any supernatural help, have the ability and the responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment, aspiring to the greater good of humankind and to the health of the planet that is our home. We find science and reason to be the best tools to gain knowledge and accomplish goals. We believe that all human interactions should be guided by respect and compassion. There you have it. Thank you. So now I'll tell you a little bit about our organization, the Bay Area Humanists. So give me a new slide, please. So now you know what humanism is and how some of us came to find it. We'd like to tell you about our local organization, the Bay Area Humanists. We abbreviate it to BAH very often. Our logo is the American Humanist Association's Happy Humanist, Happy Humanist, set with the background of an iconic Bay Area landmark. The Bay Area Humanist was started in 2012 with the idea of creating a community of like-minded people in the Bay Area. Next slide. We have monthly forums on the first Saturday of each month where we invite knowledgeable people to speak in their areas of expertise, including science, all kinds of science, geography, biology, geography, astronomy, sociology, you name it, including science, philosophy, history, politics, society, and much more. This particular slide shows a lecture that we had to celebrate Darwin Day that was given by a professor at City College who was talking about how we know the age of the Earth. Next slide, please. This was, by the way, obviously when we were meeting in person, which we haven't done in a year now. We also have a book group, which meets the second Saturday of each month. We read both fiction and nonfiction. Back when we were doing things live, we met in the San Francisco Public Library, reserved a room there. And like the forum topics, the selected books cover a wide range of topics. And by the way, the books are chosen by the participants. We select a book and vote on it for the next session. And so it's all generated within the group. The books cover a wide range of topics, both fiction and nonfiction, but science, current events, social and political issues, history, or just about anything that informs us about the human condition. In pre-COVID times, many of the participants in both the book group and the forum would adjourn to a local restaurant after the meeting to further discussion. The photo on the right shows us at one of the restaurant extended meetings. Next slide, please. A new addition to our regular activities is the BAH Discusses, a quarterly group discussion held on the first Saturday of a month, supplanting the forum of that month. It's quarterly. The dues-paying members of the Bay Area Humanists are given priority for the limited number of participants, and others may join if we have room. But because it's a discussion, we sort of keep it limited to a manageable sized group. We've only had 2 discussion groups so far, and they've both been by Zoom, so we have no in-person pictures to show. This is just a stock photo that gives the idea of sitting in a circle and discussing ideas. The next discussion group is in May, and the subject is freedom of speech. Okay, next slide. So we're always interested and eager to promote a sense of community among humanists. So in addition to dinners and our forums and book discussions, we'd like to celebrate days that are important to our naturalist worldview, such as the winter solstice. We typically have a dinner at the Delancey Street restaurant, shown here on the left, which trains formerly incarcerated people so that they can find employment. They also make really good food, it turns out. Musical entertainment was one of our part of our last winter solstice dinner, the last one we had in person, which was now, I guess it was 2019. We also like to hold summer solstice picnics, usually in Golden Gate Park, and hope to do so again when it's safe to gather. Next slide. From time to time, we also sponsor other types of outings, such as picnics on the beach or hikes in the park. Serving those in need is a humanist principle, and sponsor volunteer activities, such as the one shown here at the food bank. The number of people who do not affiliate with any religion is growing in the US, and many of these people are seeking an alternative to religion that's based on ethical values and provides opportunities to form community and serve humankind. To let people know that we're here, we've sponsored booths at street fairs and secular conferences, pictures of which are shown here. Next slide. We also like to support social justice. We've marched in the Pride Parade and sponsored a booth at the Pride celebration to let LGBTQ folks know that they're welcome in our organization. Next slide, please. So the Bay Area Humanists itself is a 501c3 nonprofit organization operating as an affiliate of the American Humanist Association. Our basic dues are $25 a year. You can see our web address here, the one that's in black. You can go to our website to learn about upcoming events, or to sign up for our monthly newsletter, or to sign up as a dues-paying member, helping to support our organization and our humanist activities. And we've given you some of the other information here, like our particular web address, Bay Area at sfhumanist.org, as well as the meetup information and the American Humanist Association. So all are welcome. Go to our website to find out more information, and I guess now we'll entertain questions.